The midday heat and the breeze blowing in from the quarried sand pit created a dusty, stuffy veil over the winding ribbon of country road that made his throat sore and his eyes water. So much so that it didn't even help to turn away from the curb where the uncultivated grasses had grown to man-sized proportions. Sneezing, Logan once again berated himself for having been tempted to walk. He would have chosen the bus and would have been in the district center by now, but as it was, he had to walk for at least another hour. Just fine. The guy stopped for a moment, dropped his backpack on the ground and pulled out a bottle of water, greedily gulped it down. He poured the rest of it over his head. That's a little better. Then, throwing the strap of the backpack on the other shoulder, went further. And then, when the road made another detour rounding a birch grove, exclaimed and smiled. Well, how could I have forgotten about it? He had already forgotten about it 100 times in these places, but he had his topographical absent-mindedness here. He could turn off the road and go along the lake. Such a rearrangement of the route added a few kilometers, but every step, of course, should now be easier. Logan was so happy that he even began to hum a cheerful tune of some song under his nose. "Uncle." A child's voice called out to him, and Logan froze. Was he imagining things? He looked around. Didn't he seem to be the only one here? "Uncle, can I ask you a favor?" The voice came again, now even closer, and Logan, before he could remember, half-jokingly and colorfully about all sorts of wild mystical spirits lured by imitation of human speech, saw the owner of this voice. It was a girl of about 7 years old, thin and white all over from the pale skin and a scattering of freckles from the nose and up to the knees to the golden, sun-whitened hair. A little girl in a dress that, judging by its drab appearance, could have once served as a potato sack, emerged from the thicket of reeds. Bare feet slapped on the muddy lake shore. Logan said. "Hello," he said, and swallowed nervously, because it was strange and unsettling to find a child in a deserted place between two villages. "Where are your parents? Where are the adults?" Actually, the young stranger frowned. "I'm big enough to go where I need to go on my own." I see Logan nodded, though of course nothing was clear. What's wrong?" "Nothing." The girl looked at him with a look that said, "Are you stupid, uncle? I just need some help. If you can't do it yourself, you have to ask others. That's what my mom taught me. And also, of course, you have to say the important word, please." "Please." "Uncle, can you make me a boat?" With the last impatient word, he was handed some old sheet of paper, I think, from a drawing album. "I think I can." Logan dropped his backpack to the ground and took the sheet. But he didn't make anything from it, instead looking intently at the girl. Something about this seemed strange and wrong to him. "So you're walking alone. Where do you live?" "There, in Chernica," waved a thin hand in the direction where there was a village with a beautiful berry name. "And why do you ask?" The girl, having knocked a mosquito off her cheek, frowned. "Are you not a bad man? Why do you want to know where I live?" The young creature's suspicion was reasonable, but it came out so amusingly, coupled with the terms of their acquaintance, that Logan grinned. "Don't you think it's dangerous to ask a stranger to make you a ship? Maybe I'm a really bad person?" "Well, that's unlikely," replied the crumb. "You look like someone else. Different. The good one. The smart one." She waved her hands. "Mommy calls them Intelligentsia?" Logan prompted, and the girl nodded. Actually, she guessed a little. He was indeed a scientist and came from what could be called an intelligent family. And as for the guess, well, Logan himself knew what kind of impression he made. Tall, skinny blonde guy with glasses, often wore plaid shirts. Yeah, that's how nerds are usually portrayed in movies. But he was just being himself, and he was fine with that. As for the opinion of others, first of all, it didn't matter. And secondly, he knew how to make an impression if he had to. Thanks to his grandfather, who did not let him down and in the period of growing up brought up in such a way that sometimes I wanted to howl. "Okay, I'll make you a ship," Logan said, and raised the sheet higher, going to bend it into a simple but quite buoyant figure. And before the sheet had been frayed and possibly soaked in a puddle and then dried underfoot, it was indeed a watercolor, and a pretty one at that. A skillful hand had subtly depicted a forest thicket, over which the moon had risen. It was interesting, the fact that there was an empty space in the middle of the drawing, on which some poem had been written, not with paint, but with an ink pen. The lines were blurred, frayed, one could hardly make out anything. But Logan made it out. One word, two words, and a line. Then another. And what he read. His heart skipped a beat, froze, kicked into a frantic rhythm, as if he'd been hit on the head and at the same time in the solar plexus. He felt like he was falling, and at the same time his whole body was petrified. And the thing was, he knew who had written it. He knew who those lines belonged to. And it was impossible, unthinkable, unreal. Because the person who had thought them up had been dead for years. She was dead. His sister, Helene. Where? Where did you get that from? He must have had the look of a madman, Logan thought to himself, because the girl was looking at him frightened. Except right now he couldn't stop. Where did you get that? I don't know. The poor child threw herself at her, shrieking shrilly as he swung around. Don't. Wait, I'm sorry. Calm down. It's okay, I won't hurt you, Logan rambled, but he seemed to be making it worse. I just need to know where you got it from. Who gave it to you? Tell me, I need to know. The poor girl's lips trembled. She retreated back into the rustling reeds and then, with another shriek, she ran, like a mouse scurrying through the thicket. He didn't think about what he was doing, he just rushed after her. But, after a step, his foot caught on some snags and then, barely unhooked, it got caught on the mud, and finally Logan just fell. And somehow he hit his head, unluckily, because when he opened his eyes, he realized that the sun had shifted in the sky, which meant that he'd been out for hours. Just fine, he muttered grimly, struggling to get to his feet, his whole body stiff from his long immobility. He touched his head with his fingers. He didn't seem to be hurt, and probably not even concussed, although of course he should see a doctor now. In addition, his clothes were wet, soaked with the odors of Tina, stained with mud. It was logical to doubt whether they would let him on the bus in such a state at all. But the main thing was that the sheet was here, and it hadn't been blown away. Logan clutched it frantically, smoothed it out, and eagerly read the lines. No, it wasn't a mistake. It had really been written by her Helen. How strange it was to feel the touch of the past, whose doom he had long since resigned himself to. They were brother and sister, and Helene was 10 years younger. He remembered her curly, unruly hair, the color of bitter chocolate, which her mother had tried unsuccessfully to braid. He remembered her sister stomping on the parquet floor. She loved to express her joy by running around the apartment, and she knew how to be happy about everything: a cake, a new dress, a colorful butterfly seen on a walk. Memories of childhood froze in the consciousness of living photographs, brief episodes from the history of one family, which lived happily and peacefully, until everything was crossed out by a car accident. Father, mother, and Ellen. They said the car just skidded on the road it was hailing thickly that day. It smashed through the barrier on the bridge and into the river. He was burying loved ones on the same day. Father, mother, and an empty baby coffin. His sister's body was not found, but journalists and acquaintances were sure that it was impossible to survive. Logan did not go to the orphanage. His grandfather, Greg, stayed with him. The old man, of course, was not easy to raise a boy, but he coped, surrounded with care, practical, and became for his grandson the best friend in the world. Good pension grandfather was a professor, and lively wit helped to live well. Logan received a brilliant home education, and by the end of school, in addition to English, was fluent in French, German, and also knew Greek and Latin, because grandfather was an advocate of a kind of classical education, which was common among the children of the nobility at the beginning of the century. And this approach, it naturally had a certain impact on Logan's entire childhood, so he didn't know what it was like to run around in garages and dabble. Grandpa thought that his grandson was the last thing left of their family and tried to give him the best that he could pass on. And generally speaking, Logan was happy with his adolescence, and he got into the university his grandfather had graduated from without question. And then, Grandpa, unfortunately, wasn't forever. Having buried him 5 years ago, 26-year-old Logan could not come to terms with the departure of the only close person. Only work saved him. He went into it with his head. And when there wasn't enough work, he went to help other people. Yes, grandfather considered charity as one of the main things that every decent person should do. And Logan, true to his principles, helped homeless animals, visited old people in orphanages, donated as much as he could from his income. And in these parts near the village of Blueberry, he found himself, by the way, for the reason of charity he visited an old woman. Her name was Darcy, and she was a former village teacher. She had children and a husband. And then, life in its saddest forms simply happened. Her retired husband passed away. Her children moved away and, having found their own families, stopped visiting their mother. True, Darcy was offered to move to a boarding school, but she stubbornly refused. Afraid of bad conditions, she flatly refused to believe that there were decent institutions. Darcy said she would live where she was born, period. In general, Grandma Darcy was strong in spirit. But in her 75 years, her health was not so good. And so, when the charity organization, where Logan was a volunteer, distributed the wards he got her. "You are a cultured young man," said to him the head of the organization, Tamara. "You will find a common language with her, I have no doubt." And so, as fate would have it, on his way back from Darcy's, Logan decided to change his route. And now he was standing by the lake. The setting sun was blinding him, and in his hands the wind was tearing a leaf. A leaf that logically shouldn't have existed in nature. Logan sighed heavily. What should he do? He decided to go to the bus stop right now. Because tomorrow he had to go to work, and the art gallery wouldn't understand him if he didn't show up for a consultation about those gorgeous green vases. "Kate." "Daughter, what's wrong?" The young woman, wrinkled pain in the leg again played out, rose and came to her daughter, who all evening sat on the sofa, frowning, playing with teddy toys, a teddy bear and a tiger. "Who hurt her?" Anastasia asked. "No," the girl replied. "Everything. It's okay." "And I know when you are a liar," her mom told her in a mysterious tone. "Your freckles are glowing. Tell me what happened." Katenka sighed, clutched the bear tighter, and told how it was that she went to play with the village children, but they began to shout at her and throw mud. Then she decided to play by herself and went to the lake. "But that's far away. Did you even leave the village?" Her mother grabbed her by the shoulders and gave her a gentle shake. "What did I tell you? You can't do that." "I'm sorry, Mommy," the little girl said in a trembling voice. "I won't do it again." Anastasia sighed heavily. Well, what to do with her daughter? 1,000 times she repeated to her to play in the yard, in the extreme case near the house, but not like this. "Okay, I forgive you this time. But you're not going to upset me again, are you?" "I won't." "And you won't go to the castle?" "Don't go there. It's a bad house." Squinted her eyes and asked Anastasia sternly. "Really?" Kate replied fervently. "I'll never go there again." "That's a good girl," smiled the girl's mother, and then, getting up, went to put tea. It was necessary to have dinner. And for dinner, well, there was one more cutlet and as much pasta as you want. "Mom, don't you eat a cutlet? Here, it's healthy, there's meat." The little girl held out her plate. "Thank you, darling, I've already eaten. I had a cutlet this afternoon." Anastasia lied easily. As she was accustomed to do, she was again giving the best and not at all superfluous pieces to her daughter. "You eat." Also, as easily as lying about her own satiety, Anastasia had learned not to cry in front of her daughter. That's the last thing she needed. Her own life stupid ruined, so yourself and suffer, and the child need a mom smiling, cheerful, kind, and caring. That's the whole story. There was no one else in their little family. Father, that creature, which Anastasia knew for sure would be too good to be called an animal, had thankfully not been around for a long time. But who could say what would happen next? He would be back soon. And so Anastasia dreaded the future. "No, thank you, but I definitely can't." "Yes, it's a shame, of course." "No, it's fine, I'm just taking care of a few things. I'll see you Wednesday." Having rejected the offer to spend the weekend at a country recreation center with kebabs and other summer pleasures of life, Logan ended the conversation with his best friend Vincent and sighed and went to wash his face. It was a strange habit, but his grandfather was right, it was invigorating. It helped to activate his brain 100%. Logan was going to go to the village, find that strange girl, and figure out how she had gotten the drawing with the poem. His smartphone beeped a tune. It was a message that a cab had arrived. "Visiting?" the cab driver asked, glancing at his passenger who was tensely pensive. "You could say that," Logan answered. "I see," he nodded. "In this weather only to visit the city. It's the best time then. I'm often here. It's good when orders are out of town than to breathe in the summer, isn't it?" "You come here often?" Logan's suddenly lively. "Well, in this area," explained the cab driver. "There's a cottage community nearby, which means that not everyone has their own transportation. My name is Ben, by the way." "Logan. Do you know who lives in the village of Blueberry?" "Well, actually, my brother-in-law has a cousin who lives here. In general, a distant relative. It's not a bad village, but there are all sorts of people, of course." "You know," Logan began cautiously. "Isn't there?" And he tried to describe the girl he had met at the lake. "What are you interested in?" The cabbie squinted. "It seemed to me that the child." Logan sighed. He knew from experience that in many situations it was better to tell the truth as much as possible. "Anyway, I met her quite far from the village," and he shared that he thought the child was obviously from a dysfunctional family, and since he himself was no stranger to charity, it might be possible to help. "So that's Anastasia's daughter," exclaimed the cab driver. "They are well known here." "Yes, it's a poor family." "What do you mean?" Logan asked, and the cabbie, clearly satisfied that he wasn't starved for conversation on the road, began to tell the story. It turned out that Anastasia was an orphan. She came to the village about 8 years ago, or rather she was brought by a local resident, Nick. He was a complicated man himself. He drank, served time, was a bully. And then he brought his wife from the city. And it was no secret that Anastasia had sold her apartment with Nick's encouragement. He promised her that with the money they'd renovate the village house and set up a farm, and they'd live. But that money soon disappeared. Nick lost it just like that, lost it in a card game and drank it. But Anastasia stayed with him. And where could she go now, homeless and in an interesting position? They started to live somehow. They had a child, a daughter. We lived badly, very badly. Sometimes, though, about twice a year, Nick tried to get out of his poor state. He quit drinking and tried to go to Darcy Botke. But it all ended in the same way. Nick came back with little left over from Darbabotka, if he got paid at all, even angrier than he was, and went back to the bottle. But 2 years ago, things got worse. The thing was, Anastasia had tried to leave him. It had been a big scandal, and the neighbors had come running. But then Nick announced that they had reconciled. But Anastasia stopped going out for some reason. They hadn't seen her for 3 months. Then she came out. And the neighbors were shocked. Because it turned out that she fell awkwardly, and no one doubted, by the way, that it happened when Nick came at her with his fists. Anyway, Anastasia fell and broke her leg. The fracture was complex, so the doctors did not turn. And when she turned, it was a little too late. And that's how the young woman became lame. And naturally, in such a state, when she became an invalid, she had no prospects to leave and take the child. "That's the story," summarized the cab driver. "So if you have the opportunity, you should help them by all means. Anastasia is a good woman, and her daughter is just beautiful, and you can't tell that the father is such a frame." "It's very picturesque here," said Logan, who was feeling a little creepy about the whole thing. "Yeah, I could use these views on a postcard." Ben grinned. "It seems like a simple village, Chernica, but it has its own attractions. Take the castle, for instance." "Castle?" Logan raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Well, it's just for show," the cab driver waved his hand. "But it's a remarkable structure. From here, from the road, you won't see it, and there is no it in Chernica itself. But if you go into the forest, you see it's a wedge. It's there, a couple of kilometers away, so there it is. Some bandit built it in the 90s. Well, that's what people say. The architecture, you know, is remarkable. All those turrets, red brick, lancet windows, all so gloomy. What do you call it?" "Gothic," Logan said. "Oh yeah. I've heard of it," the cabbie nodded. "What is it? Are these your local haunted ruins?" Logan smiled. "No, it's residential," said Ben. He turned the steering wheel deftly to avoid a huge pig lying in the middle of the road, a heavy downpour the day before. and the animal was lounging in a deep puddle. Oh, pig, that's it. No understanding of the rules of behavior on the road, huh? So this. He returned to the main topic. There's an old man who lives in this castle. His name is Dan Galbraith. He used to be a big man. It was his son who built this house, I think. And then his son disappeared. I'm telling you, he was a bandit, and such people don't live long. Anyway, the old man lived alone. His wife is long gone. Loneliness is a terrible thing. He lives alone there. When he goes out for groceries, he goes back to his place. He mumbles something to himself. He used to be an artist selling paintings, a man of art, and there he was. He didn't save the beautiful from lunacy, it turns out. They drove in silence for a few minutes, each one immersed in his own thoughts. You asked about ghosts, said Ben. There are ghosts, too, by the way. They say a lot of things about this castle, he said, lowering his voice. That on some nights you can hear beautiful women singing in the woods. And some people have seen it with their own eyes. How under the moonlight a maiden figure in a white dress, an ancient one, walks on the roof of a house. They say Ben glanced at Logan. They say it's the soul of the old man's first love visiting him, and that one day it'll drag him straight to the other side. You've got a lot of local folklore here, Logan smiled. Naturally, he took the cab driver's story about 10% seriously, but he was glad he'd had this conversation. It helped take his mind off what was coming. Logan asked to pull over at the beginning of the street. He didn't want to drive up to the gate of Anastasia's house and draw attention to himself. After paying, he wished the cabbie good luck and said goodbye. Now came the hard part. He wouldn't be surprised if the lady of the house refused to let him in, or would let him down a vicious dog. There was no dog in the yard, by the way. And it looked as if no animals were kept here. From the wicket gate, one could see the barn from afar, where there was only a void, and the warped door methodically swaying in the wind. Good afternoon, Logan said when Anastasia came out of the yard to his knocking and excuse me, is anyone home calls. Excuse me, I need to talk to you. My name is Logan Turner. You see, he stammered, though he was usually known for his eloquence, which, by the way, had helped him more than once. But now, it was strange, but it was as if he had plunged underwater when he saw her Anastasia. This young woman seemed to him monstrously haggard and lovely at the same time. She was poorly dressed and moved with difficulty, with a limp on her left leg, but she held herself with remarkable dignity, and her slightly slanted feline green eyes were shrewd and wary. Taking a deep breath, Logan decided once again that the truth was the most reliable route. He said that he was a volunteer for a charitable organization, and that he'd happened to meet Anastasia's daughter on his way back from a ward, and it just so happened that he'd thought that her family might need help. We're not beggars, Anastasia replied. We don't need anything, thank you. I can take care of my daughter. It sounded as if the young woman feared more than anything that she would be accused of not being able to take care of her daughter, or even tried to take her child away for it. Thank you, of course, she added, shivering as she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, though the thermometer was definitely over 25 degrees. It was strange, but she didn't feel a wave of wary apprehension at the sight of the young man, a familiar part of her perception of reality. Thank you, she repeated, but we never with any charities. All right, he nodded. Don't worry, please. It's not my purpose to intrude, much less she widened her eyes at those words because he seemed to read her mind. To interfere in any way with you and your daughter's lives, as if you were a bad mother. I understand your concerns, and I can assure you that the choice is yours alone, and if you say so, I will leave now. I'm not taking hidden photos or videos or recording audio right now. Don't worry about that. Our communication is confidential. But I have to ask you one thing. He took a deep breath, as if he was preparing to dive into the water. And that's the second thing that brought me here. This he unfolded a sheet of paper, carefully kept in the pocket of his clothes since it had been found. Her daughter. She asked me to make a paper boat out of it, and I'm not bad at boats, but it's very important for me to know where she got it from. Anastasia made a vague sound, a confused, wary hum, and shifted her gaze from Logan to the sheet and back again. The thing is, this leaf. Anyway, it seems to have something to do with someone important to me. Anastasia, pulling her shawl tighter around her, hummed again, bit her lip, and it was clear from the concentrated look on her face that she was making a decision that would be final. "It's not from my daughter's sketchbook," she said at last. "Kate draws well, but not like this. And not from our books. Come in," she stepped aside. "Daughter Kate, we have guests." Catherine, who sat at the table on a stool, rounded her eyes and it seems could squeal, as then at the lake, but immediately changed her mind. There was a mother and she said that they have guests. "Did the guests buy a cake?" she blurted out. "Kate, shame on you. You can't do that." "Excuse her," she said guiltily to Logan. "It's all right," he smiled. The child had just reminded him of the commonplace norms of politeness. "But unfortunately, I don't have the cake on me right now. Tell me, is your daughter allowed chocolate?" he asked quietly, leaning toward Anastasia. "Yes," she answered and nearly flinched. But not from the unpleasant sensation. On the contrary, it was so strange, but as he approached, she felt a cloud of peace and warmth and tranquility envelop her. And then the thought, which she realized was totally inappropriate, that this man, he seemed so caring and kind. "Then allow me to present young Princess of Meadows and Lakes." With a joking half-bow, Logan took out of his backpack, with which he never parted in the city, and all the trips, a box of chocolates. Generally, their charity organization did not accept very expensive material aid, but now he was acting on his own behalf, and so he chose premium candies with natural composition from Magadarcy. Katinka gasped because it was the first time she had seen such beauty up close. "I'll put the tea on," Anastasia said. And yet it was very strange. Anastasia was not used to being frank with people, and lately she had felt cut off from the world. But with this young man, it was easy and simple to talk, as if there were none of the bad things that had twisted, confused, and broken her life in recent years. And in about 15 minutes, Logan knew in general terms that mom and daughter lived alone, and dad and husband, he was far away now. An experience combined with natural instinct, and even against the background of the cab driver's story. All this made Logan realize that everything was not easy with this man. Kate seemed to be afraid of him, and Anastasia was not looking forward to him either. "The doctors say it's bad," Anastasia said, touching her foot timidly, shyly, shamefully, with her fingertips. "But there are medical mistakes, aren't there? So I have faith in the best. I'll go for treatment soon, for sure. I have to take care of my daughter. Lev, well, right?" The last was said exaggeratedly cheerful, so that it was clear that this young woman did not believe that she would be helped, but was afraid to admit her helplessness. Logan told a little about himself, what he did and everything. And then finally the conversation flowed in the right direction. "Honey, where did you get that piece of paper, please?" Anastasia asked. "I don't remember." Kate looked away, her lower lip hanging out. "I just found it." "What if Mom doesn't swear?" Anastasia stroked her daughter's head. "Sweetie, Uncle Logan really needs to know where you got it. It's very important." "Why?" "It's his job," Anastasia composed as she walked. Katinka, sighing, sent another candy into her mouth. She was already covered in chocolate up to her nose. "I really found it," the girl said, "on the road. A breeze brought it." From the castle, she whispered at the end and glanced apprehensively around. Anastasia sighed convulsively. "Honey, well, what did I say about the castle? No, I'm not scolding you. It's just. So it was lying in a clearing near it." "Yes, the wind brought it. Over the fence." The girl went on telling, "Mom, it's not my fault. The village boys made me do it. They said I was a coward, and they said they were going to listen to the ghost. And I went too. Because I'm not a coward. I'm already called a bum, an invalid's daughter. But I'm not a coward." Oh, Anastasia hugged her daughter, and that protective gesture of tenderness made Logan's heart ache. "Of course you're not a coward. You're my bravest. But, honey, you're a big girl, aren't you?" "Well, what ghosts?" "It was there," Kate whispered. "It's there. I saw it walking in the garden." "Wait," Logan interrupted. "That's the second time I've heard that. You see, while I was getting here and he relayed his conversation with the cab driver." "They say all sorts of things," Anastasia said thoughtfully. "But everyone knows that the old man lives alone. I don't know how he takes care of his garden, but everything seems to be blooming beautifully. But ghosts? Well, you don't believe in that nonsense, do you? No, Logan shook his head. They talked some more. Then Logan said he had to go, and before he left, he ventured to ask her if there was anything he could do to help. There wouldn't be any paperwork to fill out, no need to drive somewhere or talk to other people either. Thank you, but no. Anastasia sighed, but he hesitated. She was clearly hesitating. No, we'll manage. Okay, but take this. He held out his phone number to her. And if you need anything, or just want to talk, call me. Theoretically, he could and should have gone home, but Logan thought that since he was here, it might be a good idea to stop by Darcy's grandmother's house, because her blood pressure had been bad recently, so he should check on her. And by the way, she seemed to have a wobbly window sash. He'd noticed it the last time he'd been here, so it would be a quick fix. The weather was warm, but not sweltering, so it was a relatively easy drive to the next village. And on the way he pondered. Perhaps he had fantasized? Perhaps it was just a similar poem? After all, even novels sometimes, strangers to each other writers write the same, and there is not a drop of plagiarism in it, because the ideas, as they say, hover in the air. Anything is possible. Logan decided he had to meet the mysterious owner of the castle house in the woods and talk to him about it. Ellen in her 5 was unusually gifted and could draw well, at the level of a teenager already drawing with watercolors and colored pencils. Her parents said that she had a huge talent, and she was a little genius. The girl also composed poems, but since she could hardly still write, they were written down for her by adults. His brain had already invented a logical explanation. Surely this man just knew his sister once. Perhaps he had worked at the daycare center Ellen had gone to, or maybe at the art school where his sister was taken. And then years later, the man himself decided to take up art. Yes, such an explanation was quite logical, that this old man was simply inspired years later by what he had seen from the little prodigy. Anything was better than that crazy thoughts about who else could have drawn and written it. Because it was time to recognize and accept his sister was dead. Sighing, Logan threw back his head and walked for a while, looking up at the sky, at the floating clouds, enough of being crazy, of catching illusions. It was time to accept it. Finally, he calmed down. On the way to Darcy's, of course, he had to stop at the magician's shop to buy some food, because it would be unseemly to come to his ward empty-handed. Grandma Darcy Logan called from the fence. The window above the Pamilidnik was ajar, the wind fluttering the white tulle curtains, so Darcy must have heard the visitor. She did, so she looked out, splayed her hands because she hadn't expected to see him. Next time he wasn't due until a week later, and then appeared on the porch. Logan. What a surprise. She had lost her teeth long ago, but her smile was warm and charming, and her eyes shone like a young woman's. I thought I'd come by and see you. Logan smiled back. The window, I remember, should be repaired. Well, the old woman nodded. But she was acting a little strange. She didn't call me to the house. As usual, she just stood there. I'm sorry, it's just, I have a guest. A guest? Well, that's good, Logan said, a little surprised because Baba Darcy was known to be an unsociable person. An old acquaintance of mine. Used to work for him, the old woman explained, and she was a talkative person. A colleague from school? No, Darcy waved her hands. Private lessons. I know German and French as well as my subject. I gave lessons to his granddaughter. Granddaughter? Clarified Logan, who had a hound dog's instinct that Darcy's mysterious guest was probably not an ordinary man. Well, like me, he's a bit of a stranger, the old woman said with a guilty look. I see, Logan said. Is this a bad time? No, it's okay. I understand. And I'm not offended at all. Here you go. He handed her a bag of groceries. Then I'd better get going. No, come on. Come in, I won't chase you away. The old woman got worried. Dan was about to leave. You just wait a bit, okay? She asked, and went back inside. Logan leaned against the fence and looked at the flowers. Lush peonies in all shades of pink. He glanced up to see an old man coming down the porch. Yes, it was an old man in the classic sense of the word. He wore a light-colored suit, cloth shoes, new but clearly vintage, as well as a light-colored hat. He had an oaky, snow-white beard and long hair down to the middle of his neck. The old man, glaring back at Logan. quite unpleasantly by the way, walked down the road. Logan entered the house. He went straight to fixing the window, which was easy. "What colorful acquaintances you have," he said, by the way. "One look at that grandfather and it seems as if he had traveled to us in a time machine from the 30s. Dan is a truly extraordinary man and I'm proud to know him," Darcy said. "He has given a lot, sacrificed a lot for his vocation." "Oh, he's had his share." Darcy's story was a little rambling, but Logan quickly grasped the gist of it. It turned out that when he was young, Dan had been in love with a beautiful actress who had given up her career for him. They dreamed of having a daughter, but unfortunately a son had been born. The doctors said it was dangerous to try again, but they'd tried, believing that their love would be repaid. But the beautiful wife died in the second labor. They couldn't save their daughter either. Dan had to become a single father. He never married again, and he kept women away from him. He always lamented the fact that he had a son. He thought that if he had a daughter, she would be the ideal, his little princess. But his son, he didn't live up to his hopes and became a terrible man, a bandit. And then, when he died too, Dan broke down, withdrew into himself, became a hermit. He only went into town once in a while, or visited her Darcy, an old acquaintance. Wait, Logan frowned. Did he live alone, or did he have a girl? So this is the same Dan who lives in the woods. Well, Darcy's grandmother sobbed softly. My long tongue. I shouldn't have said that. I promised I wouldn't say anything. But you, Logan, you're like a grandson to me. So I had to share. Before you, they came to me. Oh, old age. One of them came to me and kept telling me to sign the house over to her and the power of attorney for my pension. And you're kind, so you're talking, old woman. Babs, Darcy, what are you saying? Don't cry, Logan comforted her, and hastily brewed her favorite soothing tea with chamomile and lime. Finally, Darcy calmed down. Yes, he had a girl, she continued. When was the last time I saw her? 2 or 3 years ago? Lovely girl. Dan said she was a guest of his. I taught her languages, and how she plays music. Piano, violin, harp, Brett. Can you believe it? She sings like a nightingale. He told me later that she left. Well, of course. Yes, she was a nice girl. Only strange. What do you mean, weird? Logan asked. Well, how to explain? The old woman thought, like a little bit out of our world, you know. She was so pure. Naive. She looked at me as if I were a wonder. She asked me how I was living there. I asked her, where is it? And she, well, in general, as if. She was alien to our reality. We didn't talk much. I taught her, that's all. Dan, he's a good man. But he didn't like it when I started talking outside the subject. That's just it. Logan frowned. All the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together in his head. Logan, where are you going? Darcy watched confused as he picked up his backpack. I gotta go, Darcy. Thanks. Thanks for the story. Logan dashed down the road out of the village. Darcy said Dan was walking. Given what the cabbie had said about the location of the house in the woods, it looked like he couldn't have gotten very far with the old man's leisurely pace. Logan took off at a run. And actually he was doing it running, but now it was not a measured movement, when on his arm a digital device, counting kilometers, steps and pulse. Now he was just running, so that it was painful to catch his breath. He stopped only when he noticed the figure of the old man ahead. He noticed it, and he ducked, slipped into the tall bushes by the road, hiding behind them. Yes, he could have caught up and talked right now, but for some reason he couldn't explain this reason to himself. He decided to talk to Dan when he reached home. And the old man didn't notice the tail. Here he entered the forest along a barely noticeable path. It seemed to Logan that he would notice him, as the branches broke under his feet and everything rustled. But Dan must have been hard of hearing, as Darcy had said. The old man must have walked for about an hour. And then, the trees parted, revealing a large clearing. On one side of the clearing ran into a low place where a stream, or rather a small rivulet, flowed. And here stood a house. It was small, but it looked majestic. Light stone in different shades, skillful masonry. Yes, this building really looked like a castle. And it was clear from the first glance it was very dilapidated. How had that ornamental tower, for example, not collapsed yet? There were only 2 floors, and on the first floor Logan noticed that all the windows had bars. There was a small garden near the house, and in it you could feel. The work was skillful, and frequent roses were blooming here. The alpine hill was full of hyacinths. There was a green arbor, and under a spreading oak tree swings were swinging. As for the fence, it was a strange combination brick and steel bars. And besides, in some places the fence was in need of repair. The old man stopped at a rusty wrought iron gate, took a large key out of his pocket, and rustled it open. Logan froze, hiding behind some horribly thorny bush. It was now or never, but he hesitated, because he didn't know what to say. For some reason it seemed to him that this grandfather was not as safe as he thought, and was not at all eager to talk openly to strangers. Logan sighed. He must be wrong. I mean, he should talk to Dan, but not like this. Definitely go back to Darcy, tell her everything, and through her he could meet the mysterious hermit. Logan was about to leave, starting to turn, but the old man, who was about to lock the gate on the other side, suddenly groaned, clutched his heart, and slumped to the sandy path. Logan rushed to him. "Grandfather," he called out, bending down. Check his pulse. Yes, no convulsions, eyes closed. Grabbing the phone, the guy swore there was no connection. But maybe it was the woods. Maybe he should have gone inside, he thought. Of course, it was doubtful that there would be a landline phone there, but at least there should be a first aid kit. He should bring Dan to his senses, give him some medicine, tell him what he was taking, and then run to the village, to the edge of the forest, to call an ambulance. The old man, despite his short stature and thinness, was unusually heavy. Logan's hands trembled as he searched his pockets for keys and unlocked the door of the house. Then, panting with effort, he carried the pensioner inside. The hallway, the door. The living room with the couch. It fit. Having unloaded Dan, Logan looked around. Well, where does he keep the first aid kit? In general, the house looked a little better from the inside than it did from the outside. But it looked as if he'd been through a time machine. Parquet floors, carpeting, massive carved wooden furniture, a huge floor clock, a plush upholstered set, bookshelves, a lamp with a green shade, gold-framed paintings on the walls, a collection of china and a collection of crystal on long shelves, a fireplace, now unlit. "Hey, Dan." Logan leaned over the old man because he groaned and wiggled. "Dan, where's the first aid kit? What kind of medicine do you need? Don't be scared, please. My name is Logan. I want to help you." "Grandpa, who are you? And what are you doing to my grandfather?" A ringing female voice made him flinch and turn around with a jagged movement, and then Logan opened his eyes in shock, because in the doorway, there she stood. A tall maiden no older than 16. Dark curly hair scattered loosely over her shoulders. She was wearing a dress, and it was immediately clear a retro outfit in the fashion of the 20s, perhaps, in her face. Logan recognized it immediately, and yet she was a stranger. He could have sworn she was practically a carbon copy of his mother in her youth. The same nose, gray eyes, cheeks. She looked horrified, confused. She looked at him as if she was seeing something amazing and yet threatening for the first time. Logan, hearing his own voice as a stranger, delicately began to explain that Dan had become ill, it seems with the heart, and he wanted to help. "Wait a minute." The girl rushed to the secretary, rustled in it, and took out a first aid kit, an ancient-looking box. "Here, heart drops." She named the dosage and poured water from a carafe into a glass. Logan helped to lift up Dan, who was coming to himself and shaking like an aspen leaf. I'll go now. I need to get out of the woods. There's no cell reception here. I'll call an ambulance." The girl frowned, bit her lip, nodded, and sat down on the edge of the couch, took the old man's hand. "I'm with Grandpa. Grandpa? I'm here." Logan felt like he was floating in weightlessness and falling into the abyss at the same time. His thoughts, now, were flitting frantically, looking like stars ready to turn to nothing under the influence of dark matter. He had to ask her. He had to tell her. And only the fact that the old man was still sick, a large shiver began to hit him, forced him to grasp with a willful effort the part of reality that really mattered now. Logan, without another word, rushed out of the house. On his way out of the woods, he fell. He didn't even notice. He flew to the edge of the forest, grabbed his cell phone, got a connection. Now call an ambulance. And then, slowly he went back. He's asleep, the stranger told him when he entered the house. His heart hurts, he said. Logan froze in the doorway. He felt strange, as if one wrong move could destroy everything, make the house, the old man and the girl, and at the same time himself, crumble into billions of pieces like a broken kaleidoscope. The girl, meanwhile, rose and approached him with a light, dancing gait. She bowed her head and regarded him. Logan, on the other hand, stared back. Are you human? She blurted out and bounced away, palms pressed to her mouth and a sly look on her face. Yes, Logan nodded. What do you mean? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, but... Human. The girl shrieked and jumped, as if she'd learned something so important. I knew it. I knew there were more of you. You. No horns, no tail, no claws. Not there either, right? She nodded at his shoes, and Logan, unable to comprehend anything at all, nodded. And your eyes don't glow. And you? Who are you, she asked, reaching out and poking him gently in the shoulder with her finger. My name is Logan, he answered. I'm volunteer. A what? I help people. I work for free for a charity organization. Why, he took in more air to quell the hysteria that was coming on. Who are you? Grandpa's princess. Simply but proudly answered the girl. My name is Amali. Why? Were you leaving? I didn't understand. To call an ambulance. There was no cell phone reception. Telly. What? What is an ambulance and why call it? It's a smartphone. A cell phone, Logan explained, and a very bad suspicion began to creep into his head. An ambulance is a service that heals people. Amelie, tell me, why did you ask me if I'm human? Because Grandpa says that people are gone, only he and I are left, whispered this young girl, and it seemed like a child sharing a terrible secret. But I read the books he hid, and the newspapers. They say there are people. That's true, Logan nodded. Oh, she splashed her hands. Grandpa. Why did he say that? Why did he say there were no people left? I don't know. I don't know him very well. You see, I came here to meet him. You did. You came to visit. The girl clapped her hands. Oh, why didn't Grandpa tell me? I would have made a cake. We don't have any guests. Only Grandma Darcy came, but she's a beast. Darcy's an animal? Logan had a nervous twitch at the corner of his mouth. Well, yes. The squirrel kindly explained. Grandfather said she was kind. Because he pays her in golden nuts. Baba Darcy taught me languages. That used to exist in the world. She was kind. And she always wore a hat. But it's etiquette for a lady to do so. Of course. Grandfather said she'd take her hat off, but she was ashamed of her squirrel ears. And he wouldn't tell me to talk to her about it. I didn't. I was curious, by the way. Amelie stomped her foot in her manner, together with her gestures and other details, but gave away that her behavior had a lot of the behavior of a small child. Logan's heart clenched uneasily. He began to realize that the poor girl seemed to have problems with her head. The old man on the couch groaned again, coming to his senses, and tried to sit up. You, get out. Get out. Dan clearly wanted to yell, but he was whispering. Speech was hard to come by. Logan rushed to him again and started saying that no, he didn't mean any harm. He was only trying to help. He was sorry. I don't need an ambulance, the old man wheezed and grimaced as if in pain and pressed his hand to his heart again. By myself somehow. You have all the signs of a heart attack, Logan said sternly. But you're an adult, of course, and you can decide for yourself. If you want, I'll go and cancel the call. Cancel it. Only. He nodded at Amelie, who had moved to the other end of the room, turned on the gramophone, and began to dance and hum softly, holding the hem of her dress with her fingertips. If you die. Your pupil, I don't know who she is. What will happen to her if you die, have you thought? Dan's expression changed from angry and indignant to frightened and confused. The old man's lips trembled. What have I done?" he whispered, lying back down obediently. "Oh, Amelie, what have I done?" "But who are you? And why did you? I saw you at Darcy's house. Why did you follow me?" "You followed her. My little princess." Why would you say that?" A cold sweat ran down Logan's back. "Why would I or anyone else come after your Amelie?" "Because I always knew that one day she'd be taken from me," the old man sighed wistfully. "I knew that one day it would all end, but I meant well." A knock on the door distracted him from the conversation. Logan went to open the door, and it was the EMTs. Amelie froze when she heard the voices of strangers. "Oh, I can't. People. More people." She squeaked and rushed out of the living room, ran up the stairs to the second floor. The door slammed. "Who's sick?" "Your father?" The ambulance doctor asked, peering warily into the corridor. She'd been on many different calls, but this one in a forested area in a strange house that looked like a museum was definitely one of the strangest. "No, a friend of mine," Logan answered. "A heart attack, I think, but it's not acute." "You sound confident," the woman snorted. "Are you a doctor?" "No, I'm a volunteer. I took a first aid course," as he led the doctor into the living room. Logan thought tiredly that everything that was happening to him was out of control, and he felt like a character in a movie scripted by a man with a lot of imagination. The doctor examined Dan, measured his blood pressure. She said that it was necessary to go to the hospital, and even more so, one should not neglect regular checkups, as the old man admitted the last time he had been to the polyclinic was about 10 years ago. But Dan resolutely refused to be hospitalized, saying that it was nothing. He would drink tea with forest herbs and feel better immediately. "You know," the doctor said to Logan before she left, "you should talk to him about how you can't do that. Indeed, all these herbs harden yourself by pouring cold water, exercise, it's all great. But the achievements of modern medicine should not be neglected." When the door closed behind the doctor and the ambulance left, Logan felt trapped again. During his time as a volunteer, he had met all kinds of people, sometimes very strange. But what was going on in this house was outrageous. That was what his intuition told him. "Young man," the old man called out to him. "Your name is Logan, isn't it?" "Yes," he answered. "Sit down, we need to talk," Dan said, and when Logan sat down, he looked at him carefully. "Up until today, I thought everything was fine. No, I'm not crazy and I didn't think I was immortal. But I thought I still had time, time to make things right." Logan nodded, though he still didn't understand anything. But he was in no hurry to ask questions. He needed to hear what this man had to say first. He needed to use this as a basis, a framework for what he could ask himself. Otherwise, Logan felt like he was going to go crazy then. And then Dan spoke. He said that the last years of his voluntary recluse had been full of peace and anxiety, which he had kept to himself. Out of fear, because he had nothing to protect himself from it. He had sought solace in the books of the wise philosophers of the past, but they, alas, could offer nothing to ease his mental anguish. But everything changed today, overnight. And when Dan felt ill, he suddenly realized with nightmarish clarity how fragile his life was. "Do you believe in fate, young man? Fate? Karma? Providence?" "I'm afraid I can't answer that question." "Neither negative nor positive," Logan admitted. Dan continued. He said that for years he'd been in contact with an extremely small number of people. Darcy, another other person in town that he paid to make necessary purchases, groceries and such. Another necessary person. And I must point out, please, this is important, that these two were not aware of what I had done. They didn't know. They didn't know the truth about Amelie. "The truth," Logan said deftly. "And what did you do?" "No, wait. I didn't tell you why I came here." "That's true," Dan blinked, squinting his eyes. "But I understand that you followed me from Darcy's house and found me at the gate. So you were my accidental savior, and yet it was no accident. So what brought you here?" This Logan pulled a sheet of paper from his pocket and unfolded it. "This. Found it near the gate of your house. And this. The thing is this. A drawing and a poem. A long time ago, something like this came out of my sister's hand. She died a long time ago as a child. And then I saw it and I just wanted to understand how you got it. I thought, maybe you once knew my family, my sister, and you yourself. At your leisure, you did some creative work, reproduced what you had seen, what you had read. You see, Logan paused for a moment, sighed heavily, rubbed his face with his palms, and smiled guiltily. I think I'm going crazy, because your pupil, I think I've seen her somewhere, and once before, and I'm sorry, I'm talking out of my ass. So it's really fate, Dan said thoughtfully. To think, after all these years. No, young man, you're not the least bit crazy. And you. It's just wonderful that you've come. And believe me, old man, all you need is this. Just listen to what I have to say. And Dan spoke. He was born into an intelligent family. His mother taught literature. His father was a restorer of expensive antiques. Dan's childhood and youth were cloudless. The family lived in a nice apartment, had 2 cars and a country house. Life was abundant. Everything was fine. Dan decided not to deviate from family traditions and decided to study history in order to teach at the university. Wait, Logan exclaimed when the old man said his last name. So these are your works. I have your books at home. Are you interested in history? In the narrow topic of the Viking Age and its influence on the Great Silk Road? Dan raised an eyebrow. I thought you were a volunteer. It's more like my second occupation, Logan answered. I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself, and he briefly described his education, his present profession as an art historian, and his grandfather's business of studying the history of the early Middle Ages. So you're capable of understanding me, Dan grinned. To realize how alien the real world can be to people like us, people of history and art. Logan shook his head. He understood what Dan was talking about, but he couldn't accept it 100%. But he was familiar with it, the desire to immerse himself in his work, mostly cutting himself off from the real world with its vanity and problems. It was so salutary and at the same time, as his grandfather had warned him, dangerous, because you could miss something important in real life, not take the main thing from life, forget about the attention you should give to your loved ones. Then came love. Dan continued his story with a sigh. Do you know this wonderful feeling, young man? No, but I have experienced it to the fullest. And I will say this love is a great gift, but it can also hurt, destroy. I was unlucky. I lost the woman I love. Dan repeated what Darcy had said about him earlier. He lost his wife, and then his son went down a crooked path. You know, they say that real crazy people don't admit that they're sick. Dan grinned bitterly. What about when you know you're sick, but you don't want to, can't do anything about it? It's like not going to. Pull out a rotting tooth. So I'm getting to the point. Will you pour me some water, young man? My throat was dry. Logan handed the old man a glass of water and he continued. Then, shortly after his son's funeral, Dan turned to a secluded lifestyle. At first he just commuted to work to the university, but he stopped socializing with acquaintances, relatives. Then he quit his job, deciding that it was quite possible to live on his pension, as well as savings that remained, plus, if necessary, you could always sell something from his extensive collection of antiques. Dan began to live on his own. It was wonderful, magical. He could escape into books for whole days. But also, he was increasingly visited by thoughts of what could things have turned out differently. What would have happened if his wife hadn't died? What would have happened if she had given birth to a daughter instead of a son? What would have happened if the daughter had lived? Dan began to suffer from insomnia. He would often leave the house and walk for hours at a time, in all kinds of weather. And one day after a storm, he went for a walk to the river. And there on the bank he found a child. It was a little girl, and she was barely alive. Dan brought her to him. At first he wanted, of course, just to warm the little girl up and take her to the doctors, to some rescuers, but then he turned on the TV. The reporter was talking about a car accident that had just happened, which had claimed the lives of 2 adults and one child, whose body was supposedly carried away by the river. Dan realized that it was the same girl. He was shocked. So this little girl had survived the fall from the bridge in the car, had not drowned, and had been found by him. Was it a coincidence or a sign of fate? He looked at her, a lovely child sleeping by the fireplace. The glow of the flames played on her ruddy apple cheeks. Her dark eyelashes fluttered slightly. Dan, getting cold, remembered what the little girl had said to him when she had come to herself for a moment there on the riverbank, and now he began to wake her gently. "Sweet girl, my little princess." He smiled at her. "Tell me, do you remember anything?" "No," said the little girl, and looked around the room with a very serious look. "And this? Who is this?" she asked, pointing her finger at the portrait of Dan's wife. It was a huge painting hanging over the fireplace. "Beautiful aunt." "Is she the queen?" asked the girl, because Dan's wife was depicted here in an ancient dress. "Well, you could say that," Dan answered and stroked the girl's head. That's your mommy, baby girl, and she's dead, and I'm your grandfather." Dan told the story of what had happened before, how he saw it as a sign of fate and decided to keep the girl. He decided that this was a gift from fate, a chance to have the daughter he never had. But Dan also realized that there was one major pitfall in his plan, an obstacle, a threat that could ruin everything. The thing was that he had learned that the girl had family left behind, a grandfather and an older brother, which meant that no one would allow Dan to adopt the little girl. And then, as Dan admitted, he made that fateful decision. Out of fear of losing little Amelie, he named her after his dead wife. And also remembering what the cruel outside world had turned his son into, corrupting, twisting him into a monster, Dan decided that this girl, she must not know the outside world. She must not become another victim of it. And Dan presented her with a new reality, in which, by a strange decision, he presented his own dead wife as his daughter, and the little girl he had found as his granddaughter. And so Amelie became a recluse. Dan realized that raising a child, a girl alone, is not easy. But the difficulties did not stop him. He bought books about raising children. He spared no money to ensure that the little girl had toys, a dress, and good food all year round. His own education and skills as a teacher allowed him to make sure that she was developing according to the norms of her age and even ahead of her peers. And the fact that she was deprived of communication with her peers and people in general. Yes, Dan understood how bad it was, but he saw it as a forced sacrifice and a reasonable value for Amelie's safety, physical, mental, and moral. Time passed. The girl grew up. Dan admitted that he had been very lucky all these years, because Amelie had never once been really seriously ill. So he had never had to go to the doctors, who would certainly have asked too many questions. They might have guessed something, and yes, that was Dan's main fear, that one day his Amelie would be taken away from him. Also, he was well aware that as she grew older, she would have questions about why she wasn't allowed to go anywhere, about what goes on outside the house. So Dan decided to take action. He began to tell Amelie stories that once there were people in the world, but then a meteorite flew in, a new sun rose in the sky, and everything changed. People disappeared, remained very last, and they are scattered across the continents. And inhabit this world now other creatures, half beasts, half people, who came to our reality from another world. And you cannot, in any case, go out to them, because among them there are many predators, and they can destroy a normal person. And the books that Amelie read, fiction, history, textbooks, from Dan's words, they all described that, disappeared, former reality. And you? Did you think she'd believe all that? Logan asked. What the old man was telling him, he couldn't get his head around, because it was the revelation of a madman, literally a maniac, and a maniac with a sophistication rarely seen. Logan could hardly realize this fact, that in his desire to find a relative and never to lose him, this old man had crossed the line beyond which madness met him, and he dived into it joyfully, dragging the innocent Amelie with him. No, Helene. Yes, now Logan knew for sure that this girl, so kind and naive, whose mind had been ruthlessly destroyed, that she was his sister. I was afraid that she would want to check it out for herself, the old man answered pitifully. So, I didn't bring newspapers to the house. She didn't know the telephone either. And also, I gave her sedatives, antidepressants. What? Logan was ready to strangle him with his own hands. Do you realize what you've done? You made her crazy. You know, we were waiting for her, me and my grandfather, my normal grandfather. Logan jumped up and started pacing around the room. We waited. We never gave up hope that one day she'd be found, that she'd come back to us. We waited. for so many years. And my grandfather, as he was dying, he told me that I mustn't lose faith. I must keep on hoping. And now, he was right. Dan smiled at the corners of his lips. Now you know everything. What am I supposed to do with this information? I don't know, Dan sighed. I'm just really afraid that if something happens to me, she's just a kid. She can't survive in the big world. After what you did to her, Logan said snidely. Oh yes, of course. She definitely can't. I want to ask you, Dan whispered, his fingers frantically clutching the blanket that covered him. Have mercy. Don't take Amelia away now. Do you want me to leave my sister with you? With a psycho? She's all I have. Dan closed his eyes. But if I'm gone, when that happens, then please take care of her. And then Dan was silent, and his hand relaxed and slipped down. Dan had never swore profanely in his life, but now he really wanted to do it because the damned old man, who turned out to be a crazy maniac, had lost consciousness again. Apparently, he had refused hospitalization in vain. What a day this is, Logan exclaimed, instead of the rich palette of other words he wanted to say, and rushed out of the house. A run to the woods, a call. A new call and his pleas to come as soon as possible, to which he was told that of course that's how you go to the sick. And then, when the ambulance arrived and Dan was brought to his senses, then he finally agreed to be taken away. Grandpa. Amelie ran down the stairs and rushed to the stretcher where the old man lay. No, don't take him away. I won't let you. The poor girl was crying. You'll give him to the beasts. Young lady, please don't interfere. One of the doctors tried to talk some sense into her. What animals? We're taking your grandfather to the hospital. Amelie. Dan grabbed his granddaughter's hand. They met eyes. I love you, my girl. I'm sorry. I lied to you. About the world around you. About a lot of things. But now, you have to obey him. He nodded at Logan. Do what he tells you to do, okay? Be good. Oh, my heart hurts. Finally, the sick man was loaded into the ambulance, and it drove down the road out of the forest. Logan stood there at a loss. He realized that now. He had to decide something urgently. He glanced at Emily. The girl was agitated, nervously nibbling her finger. The carriage is strange. The one that took grandfather away, she said. Why are there no horses? Logan sighed. He knew that, as a normal person, he should be happy that his sister had been found after all these years. But he also realized that she was. Unfortunately, she was. Not at all the girl his sister could have been, growing up under normal circumstances. In front of him was an adorable, but it was unclear how normal a creature. And he, definitely, now he had to make a lot of important and difficult decisions immediately. Logan didn't consider himself a weak man. He thought that he was ready for many unpleasant surprises of fate, but right now he was at a complete loss. How was he supposed to react to what had happened? Yes, he had found his sister. But it was also true that right now there was a girl standing right next to him. A girl he didn't know, and she needed serious help. Amelie, he said softly to her. Do you agree to come with me? Where to? She asked. Now she was tearing flowers, dandelions growing by the fence, and looked like she was going to make a wreath out of them. Your grandfather told me to take care of you. And I will. But I can't stay with you here in this house. Because I have to go back to the city. I have a job there. Lee, do you know what a job is? Do you think I'm stupid? She snorted. And we're going in a horseless carriage. Yes, Logan nodded, thinking that getting the girl out of this place was a lot easier than he'd thought it would be. But beyond that, and beyond that, it was going to be a lot harder. And so it was. While they were waiting for a cab and Amelie was packing her things, Logan called an acquaintance who was a psychiatrist by profession and worked in a private clinic. Logan briefly outlined the situation to him and told him that his sister really needed help. He also explained that, unfortunately, he didn't see any possibility to put the girl with him in the apartment because it was not clear how she would behave in a new, unfamiliar environment. And it is not an option to take her with him every time leaving the apartment. because Amelia has never seen the city, the outside world outside the forest. You're telling me some kind of fiction. Sandro reacted violently. I mean, I believe you, but the case is incredible. Yes, you're right. You cannot put the poor thing with you. But you know, we have here as wards. That is, not the kind in which the violent are kept, of course, but just some clients who are treated for depression, for example, or from obsessive-compulsive disorder in a serious degree. They sometimes prefer to stay with us because, well, you know, here is a safe space, no worries of the outside world. And the conditions, believe me, is in a 5-star hotel. We have this, and the greenhouse recently built, well, and there is a park. Come on, bring your sister, we'll sort it out. And then Sandro asked if Logan had any of his sister's belongings at home. Of course, he answered. Her toys, her dresses. Grandpa didn't want to throw it all away. At our place, he added, we have the room where Ellen lived. It's still standing like that. Everything's still there. Grandpa and I only cleaned it sometimes. Good, Sandro responded cheerfully. You know, we can try to give your sister back the memory of who she is. Really? Exhaled a shocked Logan. Sandro replied that the chances are there. And even if some of her childhood memories are gone, the contact with the former environment in which she lived, touching old things, all this will help the girl to return back from the madness in which the old man plunged her. And of course this guy must be dealt with, Sandro added gloomily. It's a maniac. He must not go unpunished. Yes, I understand, Logan sighed, who could barely lift the weight of the only concern he had what to do with his sister now. And what would happen to Dan, he was trying not to think any further right now. Logan led his sister out of the woods into the part of the road where there was a sign for both villages. He had marked it as a reference point when ordering a cab. And what was surprising was that the driver was the same man who had driven him last time, Ben. They got in the car drove off. Logan was afraid that his sister would throw something out on the way, but she only sniffed thoughtfully and was very interested in the upholstery of the seat, checking it with her finger. Did you find what you were looking for? Ben asked, looking in the rearview mirror at the passenger and his companion. Yeah, Logan nodded. Naturally, he wasn't going to. He just couldn't tell everything his sister was there, but he said he'd found the owner of the house and, unfortunately, he was in the hospital. And this Logan struggled to find the right words. His pupil. We're going into town, but we're very, very tired, he added with pressure. And we don't want to talk about anything. I see Ben had been working in cabs for a long time and knew perfectly well when a customer didn't want to talk. Though here, of course, curiosity was burning. But Ben was tactfully silent. He only looked with interest at the unusual passenger when she commented in her peculiar, strange manner on everything she saw outside the window. Logan ordered a cab all the way to the gate of the psychological and mental health clinic where Sandro worked. Well, happily ever after, Ben said, and then gently slipped Logan a piece of paper with his cell phone number on it. I realize that I'm poking my nose into my business, but maybe we should call each other, huh? Talk about life. Tell me what's going on over there. How's everything? I will, Logan nodded, taking the note. And now came the hard part. Because, in general, although he and the owner of the clinic and Sandro, who met them, tried to act delicately and gently, but Amelie, when she realized that they came not to her grandfather, but to Logan's friends, at whom she would have to stay for a few days. That poor girl was hysterical, and it was very difficult to calm her down. Logan called the hospital to see how Dan was doing. The doctor replied that the old man was put in the general ward, but unfortunately he is very bad. Prepare for the worst, said the doctors, and Logan understood everything. At work, naturally, they were not thrilled that one of the best employees could not go out again, but Logan simply said that if they didn't like it so much, if they couldn't get into the situation and understand that he had a family emergency, then in that case, why don't they just fire him? The day ended, evening came, night fell on the city. Logan picked up Emily the next morning and told her they were going to visit her grandfather. The girl was thrilled with the news. What do you think? Logan asked Sandro, who had already had a chance to talk to Amelie. The case is difficult, but not hopeless, he replied. Of course, we still have to look at it, but I think that she has a good consciousness, in the sense that she is intelligent. It seems that this maniac took good care of her education in a sense. I think the main task now is to familiarize her with the fact that the real world, it's not fiction. And I want to tell you right away that it will take a long time for her to adapt to it. It will take a long time. And another thing Sandro added, your sister. Now I will have to do a lot to make her have documents, so that she is no longer considered dead, you know? It will still be necessary to establish kinship by genetic expertise. You said she's 16, right? Well, you're going to get custody, right? Absolutely, Logan nodded. Okay, do you need any help? Why don't I come with you to the hospital? No offense, but who knows how she'll behave in the city and at the hospital. Logan gratefully accepted the help, and the three of them went to the hospital. Danu was conscious, able to speak, and seemed to be thinking clearly. Amelie rushed to him with a joyful cry, fell on her knees at his bedside, and pressed her cheek against the old man's palm. Grandfather. Sweet grandfather. Nightmarish and insanely touching scene at the same time. Do you agree? Whispered Sandro to Logan. Dan meanwhile spoke to Amelie. He asked her to pay attention, because he had something very important to tell her. And he said that now, from this day forward and forever, Amelie should trust Logan because he is her closest, dearest person. He will take care of her. Dan apologized and said that he always and more than anything in the world loved Amelie. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I wanted to keep you safe, and so I hurt you. I lied to you. Grandfather, what are you talking about? The girl asked, confused. I don't understand. You'll understand later, Dan said. He nodded at Logan. He'll explain everything to you. Well, that's it. Go. I need to rest. Logan, stay. Sandro took Amelie out into the corridor. Logan stayed behind. Dan told him that as soon as he felt better, he got his strength back and called his lawyer to the hospital. Yes, despite the fact that Dan led the lifestyle of a hermit and recluse, the means allowed him to have a good lawyer, who in particular helped him to conclude all deals with the sale of antiques. However, the fact that the old man lives not alone, this lawyer knew nothing. And only just yesterday Dan devoted his faithful assistant in the whole story with Amelie. Naturally, he was shocked, but also did not refuse to provide his services further. The lawyer also offered to help him find a lawyer, but Dan declined, saying that it would not be necessary anymore because he would not have much time left. I dream about my son every night, coming for me, waiting for me. And my wife is waiting for me there, the old man said. Dan also told Logan that he had long ago prepared a will, according to which everything in the house and antique riches in it, as well as some collection of jewelry. All this goes to his daughter. But she, the poor child, by herself alone, she'll be lost in this world, the old man said with tears in his eyes and clinging to Logan's hand. Help her. I won't leave her, Logan said. She's my sister. And maybe Dan smiled sadly. One day she'll be able to forgive me for everything. And maybe, one day you'll be able to forgive me too. Logan didn't know what to say to that. Forgiveness. To give forgiveness to a man who had behaved like a monster, who had taken his sister away and plunged her into madness on purpose. However, Logan also realized that now, when Dan was on edge, he couldn't be cruel to him. I've already forgiven you, he said, and squeezed the old man's hand lightly in return. You have my forgiveness, and believe me, my sister will remember all the good you've done for her. Logan was at a loss. What should he do? He realized that Dan had committed a crime to lock up his found child, to treat her like this all these years, covering everything with love. But on the other hand, no. Logan realized that he was not able to think more about it right now. After all, right now Dan was lying in the hospital. He was no danger to Elena right now. Ellen. Logan had dedicated a few hours that very day to chatting with the girl. She was really very smart, although her ideas about the world around her were strange. And she was also surprisingly easy to accept the fact that her grandfather had admitted to her that he had lied. She only asked Logan what Grandpa had lied about, and he tried to carefully explain. He was also happy that Amelie liked so far in the clinic, through the efforts of Sandro, who connected to this extraordinary story and the owner of the clinic. The girl lived in a separate room, which was really very similar to home cozy conditions. It turned out that Amelie was very fond of reading. Logan tried to explain to her what a phone, TV, showed her a video on a smartphone. And in general, he expected that she would be shocked, would be delighted, because it's such a fantasy for her usual picture of the world. But Amélie, after a little attention to this, returned to the books and also took up a sketchbook and watercolors. Interesting, but boring. It's not real, that's what she said. And then, Logan suddenly realized that in the midst of all the important things he had been doing, he had forgotten that there were other people who needed his help, Anastasia and little Kate. He decided to go to the village and visit them. He'll take a cab for the whole paycheck. Sandro joked and suggested that tomorrow was his day off and he could take him to the village. And while driving, of course, did not do without talking. "So she is pretty," said with a grin Sandro. "So you like her? Were you even listening to me?" Logan frowned. "I didn't say anything like that." "That's right. You didn't say it directly," he nodded, now with a grin that was not teasing but condescending. "But the way you said it, it speaks volumes, you know." "Can't you be serious?" Logan leaned his head back against the seat with a groan. "I've got a headache." Sandro was a good friend. He knew how to keep his jokes in moderation. And so the rest of the trip was silent. So Logan even managed to take a nap, where here his friend poked him lightly in the shoulder as the car slowed at the gate. "No one," Logan said disappointedly after a moment, as no one answered their call. "Wait," Sandro said. "I heard something. Come on over here." "Hey, you can't do that," Logan hissed at his friend, who without permission of the absent owners opened the gate and entered the yard. But Sandro confidently stomped toward the house. "Quiet," raised his hand. "Do you hear?" Logan obediently tried to catch any sound. Silence. Although, he heard it. A thin, muffled sound, reminiscent of a trapped animal crying. He knocked on the door and called his name. The strange sound from the other side intensified. "Wait, we have to check." Sandro, going around the house, looked through the window. And after a moment he recoiled, swearing, and then he just took the glass and broke the window. Then, wrapping his hand around the sleeve of his jacket, he ran it inside and unlocked the window sash. And now Logan was totally okay with that action because he saw what was inside the house too. There in the room were both of them, mother and daughter. Little Kate was sitting, crawling into the far corner of the room, under the table. The girl was trembling and seemed so frightened that she could not even cry, let alone call for help, and only made such pitiful sounds. Anastasia was lying next to her on the floor. She was lying on her side, curled up in a ball, as if she wanted to defend herself. And she was unconscious. And her face, hands, everything was in the traces of an unequal fight. The third person in the room was a man, a huge man sprawled on the couch. He had obviously fallen asleep from alcohol. There were bottles lying near him. And right now his mouth opened, and he let out a long, crackling snore. "Anastasia." Sandro rushed to the young woman, checked her pulse. Alive. Logan crouched on the floor and spoke softly to Kate, trying to convey to her that there was nothing to be afraid of and it was safe to come out. Anastasia started to come to her senses, moaning softly, then shrieked, startled. "Anastasia, it's all right. Don't be afraid. Everything will be all right now," Sandro said. Anastasia looked around frantically, then, from the last strength, rushed to her daughter, who decided to finally get out from under the table and hugged her, pressed her against herself and cried, "Help. Please save me. I can't take it anymore." What? Who are you?" A huge man, Nastia's husband, started to wake up. Anastasia, seeing this, cried out in horror and then froze because Sandro, without much conversation, with one powerful blow to the face, sent this guy into unconsciousness. "Not very right, perhaps, but I don't want him to stop us from leaving," said Sandro, losing his knuckles, his hand hurt from such a blow. Acting very gently, carefully, the friends led Anastasia and Katya out of the house. Sandro thoughtfully reminded them that they had to bring the documents with them. The decision was made instantly to take the woman and the child to the apartment with Logan, because they would have nowhere else to go. "Thank you," Anastasia said quietly. "You saved us. We really won't be in your way much longer." "You're not in the way," Logan sighed. "The main thing is not to interfere with your husband," said Sandro. "You're not going to forgive him? You're not thinking of going back to him, are you?" he asked. And when Anastasia shook her head in the negative, he continued, "We'll be there soon. But before we go home, you need to go to the hospital, of course. In the meantime, tell us what happened." And Anastasia spoke. The night before, her husband had come home. He had been fired from another job without paying anything, and he had come back very angry. Anastasia took the risk of talking to him about how things couldn't go on like this, and said she wanted a divorce. Then the man raged at her, reminded her that they were husband and wife, and said that he would teach her obedience, that he would put them both, mother and daughter, on a leash like unruly dogs, and that they would never leave the house again, not even to go to the yard. He threw himself at his daughter. Then Anastasia, who was trying to protect the little girl, got the brunt of it. Then the husband took to alcohol, after which he fell asleep for a while. Logan listened to the story in steely silence, and it was only by the change in his gaze that he could guess what he was thinking. He was about to say something, but his phone rang. Logan took the call, and for the second time his face changed. "Dan's dead," he said in a low voice. Those had been difficult, eventful days for Logan, days that had turned many ideas about his own life upside down, in which that very life had taken the most bizarre, disturbing, demanding forms. He was the only one who could take care of seeing Dan off in a dignified manner. He had 1,000 things he needed to do urgently in order to get custody of his sister, as well as to ensure that she received full treatment and support from qualified professionals. And then there was Anastasia and Kate. Logan had put them in his apartment as he had planned, for what he thought would be the first time. And though he hadn't planned it, it just so happened that he had told Anastasia about his sister and the recent events surrounding her. "That's terrible. What you've been through," Anastasia responded with genuine sympathy. "But now, everything's all right, isn't it?" "I wish I could believe that," Logan replied. "I do believe that." Theoretically, Anastasia and Kate could have moved into a rented apartment soon. The charity where Logan worked had responded to the story and was willing to help. But he'd refused. And he had a hard time explaining it all to himself, but he was better off that they stayed with him. There was plenty of room in the 4-room apartment. Anastasia was naturally very timid at first and asked permission for every step. But a little later, at some point, it became a regular thing. She would get up early and cook breakfast for Logan, and though he repeatedly said it wasn't worth the trouble, she would do it. As for little Kate, she, unlike her mother, settled down at the new place much faster. And although in general Katenka was a modest and well-mannered girl, but at the same time she was very curious and asked a lot of questions about everything that surrounded her. For example, she was very interested in all kinds of sea stories related to a large collection of shells, which were collected from all over the world by Logan's great-grandfather. And then it happened, when the divorce proceedings were already in full swing. Logan offered to take Nastia to a good clinic for an examination. She refused, but he talked her into it. And according to the results of the examination, it became known that the young woman's leg can be saved. You just need to operate. "I don't have and won't have that kind of money," said Anastasia. "Don't worry about that," Logan said. But she was against it, saying she couldn't accept it. For her daughter's sake. For Kate's sake, Logan made the strongest argument, and Anastasia had to agree that the baby needed a healthy mom. And even a little later, Nastia's deadbeat ex-husband was stripped of his parental rights. And besides, Logan and Sandro had a serious talk with him, explaining that he should never go near Nastia and her daughter again, otherwise he would be in serious trouble. Logan's sister was still in the clinic. She was having a hard time over the loss of her grandfather. It made it difficult to get the girl back to the real world. But gradually she was getting better, and according to Sandro, very soon Ellen could move in with Logan. As for the inheritance from Dan, it was going to be huge, even by rough estimates, because Dan, as it turned out, collected very rare and expensive antiques. The surgery on Anastasia's leg was successful, and soon the doctors were talking about the fact that she would probably be able to walk normally. "Thank you," Anastasia thanked Logan very often, but this time she was especially excited. It's all thanks to you. You just saved us. We've talked about this before, Logan said jokingly. He had been thinking about Nastya a lot lately. It was strange, but at some point he realized that he had gotten used to her. And her daughter, too. And now it was hard for him to imagine that one day, or rather soon, they both might leave him. Anastasia, Logan said softly to her. We need to talk. About what? The young woman asked excitedly. The conversation took place in the late afternoon. Anastasia stood on the balcony of the apartment and watched the lights of street lamps, the rare glowing windows of houses, the cars driving along the many roads of the city in the early fall night. About us, Logan said quietly. About us? She echoed. Yes, he said, and continued. He told her about his sudden feelings, about how he'd never felt anything like this before. He also said that all his help, that in no way makes Anastasia his responsibility, and even if she turns down his offer, he's still a friend to her and her daughter. I certainly should have done it differently, Logan said, looking into Nastya's eyes, which seemed to reflect the stars. Buy a ring, arrange everything romantically. But I just somehow spontaneously decided everything finally. I want you to be my wife. Anastasia smiled. A single tear rolled from her eyes, no more. And then, she threw herself around Logan's neck and hugged him tightly. I love you, he said. I love you, too, she whispered back. Do you think I'll be able to dance at our wedding? The wedding took place in the spring, in a garden full of blossoming trees. And Anastasia wore not only a beautiful dress, but also high-heeled shoes that she could dance in, just as she had dreamed. And on this day, she and Logan felt the happiest. They were happy, but they didn't know yet what was ahead of them. They didn't know that in a year there would be a new addition to their family. Kate would have a baby brother, who would be named George. They did not know that in 4 years Sandro, who had become a close family friend, would decide to marry Helene, who would give him her consent. Nor did they know that Helene would fully recover her mental health and decide to continue her family's work and become a talented historian, dedicating herself to the theme of ancient Egypt. All this was on the marvelous wedding day, only the future hidden from them. But the fact that in this future and in many other years they would be happy was already clear.